Coming up on Friday, June 21st at 9:30 p.m. at the Royal Albert Arms, the TD International Jazz Festival and Jazz Winnipeg will be presenting the otherworldly sounds of the Juno Award-winning band Avataar. Based in Toronto, Avataar mixes elements of modern jazz, Indian classical music, Javanese gamelan, and contemporary improvisation into a marvelous cocktail of sound that is at times funky, at times ethereal and hypnotic, and is completely cinematic in scope and breadth. Led by sax and flute player Sundar Viswanathan, the band's lineup consists of vocalist Laura Swanky, tabla player Ravi Nayampally, guitarist Michael Occhipinti, bass player Rich Brown, and drummer Max Sennett. All of these musicians using their talents to create melodic layers of sound that will leave the listener transfixed and fully engaged. The show on June 21st is going to be something really special. And joining me here over Zoom to talk about Friday night's show, I am joined by Avataar bandleader and woodwind specialist Sundar Viswanathan. Hi, Sundar. Nice to meet you here over
Hi,
Zoom.
you too. Pleasure to be here.
Mm. So I want to start out the conversation by saying this is very much an East meets West project. You were born in India, and the Eastern influences are apparent, but with the tabla and some of the sounds and textures in Avataar. Can you talk about what you had in mind when you put the band together?
Well, the thing about a band like this is everybody comes with their own influences and their own history musically. And I mean, it, I see the players as interpreting my music through their own sort of filter.
Mm,
So some of them have that Indian background, or they have studied some of it. Some have studied done other. We're all based apart from Ravi, who's a master of North Indian classical music. The rest of us are. I think our foundations are primarily jazz, but we have all studied different things. So it's almost like the music has its own flavor to it, the way it's composed, but really the way it came out was really based upon the players, and
mm,
it sort of evolved that way. So the sound has changed over the years with different players.
mm. Uh, you mentioned Ravi, your tabla player. I was reading about him. Apparently, he studied in India for a long time. What does
Yeah.
that knowledge add to the sound of the band? I mean, when I'm listening, the tabla is used so effectively as both a rhythmic and some at times melodic instrument. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, like you say, that the tabla has a very specific rhythmic reference. I mean, it references sound and the aesthetic of Indian classical music, and it brings kind of that history as well into it, and his study of the history and his focus on that tradition. He's able to sort of ground that part of the music in that approach, and yeah, it's kind of a depth, adds a sort of depth to it. I like to talk about it. With some of my students, about music like this as kind of being like I mean, kind of like a mixture. I call it a masala if you want, like of different spices, different flavors, all put together, and it
Mm,
creates sort of a new flavor. I like using analogies of food, so I
yeah.
mean, it creates a new sort of flavor, but within music. So it's kind of his approach coming from deeply from Hindustani North Indian classical music, informs from that perspective. And then of course everybody has their own, like I mentioned before, has that. So there's all kinds of dimensions that are brought to it, particularly Ravi's strong tradition.
Mm. And one of the other things that really makes the band really cook and work really well is you have a killer rhythm section. Michael Occhipinti on guitar and Max Sennett on drums, and your bass player Rush Brown. How did you put together that rhythm section? They're really great.
Yeah, it's a funny story. I mean, Rich, like I say, that the Avatar's been around a long time. We've been playing. Let's see, I want to say about 19 years as a whole. Since I almost as soon as I came back to Toronto. And Rich was one of the first bassists, probably the second bassist. Like I said, the band's evolved a lot.
Mm.
And Rich was actually played with us many years ago. And then there was a span of time when he didn't play with us, and he came back and he's playing our tour. Um, So that was kind of because I not only because he played in the band, but because of Rich's bad. I mean, he's like, and I mean by bad, I mean good.
Yeah,
He's one of the heaviest bass players in the country, if not the world, really.
yeah,
um, I always wanted to have him to do more playing with him. And he's so busy, and I was really lucky that he was able to do this. And then Max has been in the band for about 10 years, probably. And he comes from another world tradition. He plays a lot with South American musicians and Middle Eastern musicians, the Latin tradition and Middle Eastern tradition and African tradition. And he's really got that particular approach and percussion too, but he brings that to the drum set, right? And then Michael too is coming from, having played with a lot of different world perspectives. I mean, he's got his own band, which is based around Sicilian music, which is a whole different animal.
yeah.
Um, it's kind of, we're really lucky because there are people in the cities everywhere in Canada really that have really got all kinds of different interests in music, and together to find the right people who can work together and who can interpret the music well, it really adds a richness to the music as a whole. So it was kind of an evolution, like I say, the way these guys came together,
Mm.
and others too.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk about your compositions. You're a professor of music at York University, where you teach saxophone as well as composition. How much do Eastern scales and rhythms make it into your own compositions and the compositions that you're teaching to students? How much of that plays a role?
Well, a fair bit. I mean, over the years, I've studied Indian classical music, but also studied Turkish music. I've studied, the Makam system. I've
Mm,
studied Brazilian music. I've studied some African music, and so I mean, those are in the back of my ears always. So even when I'm thinking about using a particular, say, scale, Indian scale or raga, or at least using that combination of notes, um, it's being filtered through the way I'm hearing something else potentially. So if you hear the music, you'll hear some things that refer back to Indian music. There might be some sound things, there might be some scalar things, there might be some textural things, like you said before. But then you'll
mm,
hear a melody it's got the sort of lyricism of like Brazilian music, because I'm really influenced also by Brazilian music. So that comes in, those elements come in. But the way I look at it, and when I tell my composition students too, is that you have to study a lot of different things, and you can write what you're writing. You can write it with a scientific way of writing it, but if you do it that way, it may never feel really integrated.
yeah,
So
yeah.
what you want to do is really get it internalized, and then when you write what you're hearing, and what you're hearing is going to be a part of all the things that you have internalized. So
Mm,
that's kind of the way it seeps in. So it's starting to internalize itself more because of over the years I've been more deeply into it and writing more and thinking more about it. So I try to keep it, even though it does seep in, I try to keep it as organic. I don't know if that's a good term to use here, but it's as natural as possible.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, One of the other things I love about Avatar's music is the way you double up on voices. Very often, you'll have saxophone doubling up with the singer, or guitar doubling up with saxophone, and the melodies are quite long. Where does that come from for you?
Uh, that particular combination, well, I mean, I'm a vocalist as well, and I can't really sing in this band because I'm too busy with the saxophones and flutes. But in the recording, I have overdubbed some stuff. But first of all, I love the voice. I love the voice. I've listened to a lot of the singers in the Great American Songbook. I mean, I know Latin music really well, and I know the singers really well, and I know that approach. I listen to Brazilian singers, African singers, Indian classical singers. I love. So
Mm,
the voice to me is, they say that every instrument wants to be like a voice, right? That's what they say, and it's true in a lot of ways because the voice, it's our first instrument. It's a national instrument. It's so flexible. If you develop some technical facility, you can sing a lot of really lines that a horn can't play. I mean,
mm,
there's a lot of fluidity. I mean, there, I'm always trying to sound, like I said, like a voice, and there's certain lines that I'm hearing, melodic lines in my compositions. I just can't play it on my saxophone because I don't have the type of smoothness. The saxophone's not built that way,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know. So I need something that can do it. So I brought a voice in, and then I can sort of tag onto that voice and use, use the voice when I need it to sound a certain way. And then the combination, of course, the color of the vocalist that I work with is just beautiful. And I love the blend that happens when you do saxophones or other instruments with the vocals.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely fantastic on the recordings. Um, when I was listening to Avatar, sort of three bands really popped my mind: Weather Report, Early Weather Report, Late Coltrane, and Paul Horn. For
Oh yeah.
you, uh, how would you describe the overall sound of the band?
Yeah, that's interesting. What's interesting, I'll say first, is that when I've had people come up afterwards and ask and they tell me what they think or what they're hearing, there's a lot of disparate things. I mean, it's so funny because someone will say one thing, someone else will say something else. I'm hearing this, and I say, oh, well, that's I guess you could, I guess I could, but that I haven't really checked out that music that much, right? Else, or whatever it is. But for me, people like Jan Garbarek
Mm-hmm.
and his stuff with Keith
The
Jarrett.
sat,
Keith Jarrett, huge
yeah,
influence on me.
yeah,
Huge
yeah,
influence.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, compositionally. Um, Shakti, the band with John McLaughlin,
yeah,
uh, Zakir Hussain, that band, big influence. Mahavishnu Orchestra, for that matter. With John McLaughlin. Late Coltrane, yes, as well. Late Coltrane for
mm,
sure. And Ornette, also Ornette
yes,
Coleman.
or
There's
Coleman,
a
yeah, yeah,
freedom there. Um, Paul. Interesting you say Paul Horn. I mean, Oregon was an influence for me, quite that
mm,
band Oregon, and
yeah,
so that sound. I mean, that kind of aesthetic
yeah,
uh, with the long lines and almost a classical aesthetic also. I mean, I should note that I my first degree was in classical music, so
yeah.
I really studied classical music and the composers. If you're talking about that, I influenced by Scriabin,
Mm,
and I'll say Schoenberg, who's not influenced by Bach. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
you know, so I mean, there's a real sort of mixture, but um, I would say if you ask my biggest influences, I'd say oh, I forgot to mention Jobim, huge influence on
Yeah.
me, Antonio Jobim.
Tom Shabim, yeah,
Jobim, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. So to him, Keith Jarrett, Coltrane, John McLaughlin, and Jan Garber, those I think are the biggest influences.
yeah, yeah, fantastic. So you're playing this Friday night at the Royal Albert Arms. What can people expect to hear?
Well, we try, and I hope that people, listeners, will sort of be taken on a journey there because all the music that we're playing it comes from some need to write, and it comes the themes of all the songs and all the compositions that I've written have a reason behind them, and they were written because of something that moved me or something that inspired me, and I don't consider myself a prolific writer. I think I spend a lot of time when I write on something and I write it with a lot of detail.
Mm,
So my compositions, you can expect to hear something you probably haven't heard before. You're gonna hear jazz, but you can hear all kinds of other things. Well, I mean, I was gonna say I'm also influenced by Rush and
yeah.
huge influences.
Mm,
When I was growing up, that's what I was listening to. So you'll hear all kinds of stuff. I've heard people say like things like that when they hear the music. I hear some art rock or something in there. They'll say that too.
mm,
And yeah, so hopefully we'll take our listeners on a journey and emotionally and musically because the
yeah.
music means something to me and the band, and hopefully that'll be brought across to the listeners.
Mhm. Can you talk about the form on in a live show as opposed to a recording? Are you going to be opening it up on Friday night for solos and that kind of thing? Like when I hear your music, there are a lot of opportunities where you can really open things up for soloists that are rip.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we still have, in fact, we'll be able to open up maybe a little more on live concerts because we may not have play as many tunes as are on the recording, but we'll have more chance for some of the musicians to stretch out and improvise. Um, so yeah, and the compositions that I write are not like I just want to make a note that they're not like melody and then solo then melody. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
those are really integrated for the most part into the composition. So they'll kind of weave in and out with solos, and that should be part of the story too, right?
Yeah, it's not straight up head
Yeah.
solo and then back to the head. There's yeah, it's interwoven in. Yeah, that's fantastic. As I understand it, Winnipeg is your first stop on the Jazz Festival circuit on Saturday, the 22nd. You fly out to BC to do a number of shows. What are you and the band looking forward to most about starting the tour, and in particular, starting the tour in Winnipeg?
Yeah, I mean, I've never been to Winnipeg, and I'm really interested to see Winnipeg and just in general and experience some of that part of Canada. It's interesting because I think every audience is a little bit different, and we've had some great audiences all over the country and in other parts of the world, and it's cool to see how they were, what their sort of approach or their the way they sort of take the music in. And I'm to be honest, I'm also looking forward to exploring, when we have time, the different cities that we're going to and checking out some good food. I mean, I'll bring
Yeah,
it back to that because that's always a highlight of a tour. I'll be
yeah.
honest with
And there's great food here in Winnipeg, that's for sure.
you. Yeah.
Sundar, this has been so great meeting you. All the best on Friday night. The band is really excellent. I'm sure the show is going to be fantastic. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me today. This has been great.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.